It's Amber Bradley, your host for the unscripted side of LP. It's TalkLP podcast time.
3, 2, 1. 'Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it.
What's up, TalkLP podcast people? Coming to you again in other news with the CIA guy, John Franchi. What's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Do I have to say former CIA guy? You're not going to get in trouble, are you?
Well, it's too late now, so
We'll rewind it.
there we go.
Okay. I'm glad I got you on here because obviously there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going on in this crazy world? So I have no questions for you because normally you just are like espousing like your knowledge of what's happening. So, and I know you've been traveling all over.
Yeah.
And being an expert in Middle East and international affairs,
Yeah.
you're the perfect guy to comment.
Yeah.
And so I want you to give like what's going on right now, like future, and then like what can people expect to happen, and in the terms of like what's this gonna, I don't even know if you know these things, but I'm guessing that you do, like what's gonna happen to the economy, what's gonna happen, like what should retailers be like braced for now that all this stuff's going down, like ready, go.
Yeah. Go. Oh, there you go. No pressure. I mean, this is one of the most challenging issues, I mean, I think that exists out there. We've been trying to deal with the Palestinian and the Israeli peace process since Israel started as a country in 47. And we've failed every single time. The closest we got was under Clinton, and that was when Arafat basically walked away. Arafat, the leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, essentially walked away. And then since then, there really hasn't been any serious interlocutors on the Palestinian side. They created a thing called the Palestinian Authority that was supposed to be the government that would run things. That has basically been a corrupt, feckless kind of organization. There are some good people in it, but the leadership has basically not been the best, and so they're not a real interlocutor. 2000 things started shifting in 2006. In 2006, Hamas won the elections in Gaza, and the Israelis just prior to that had pulled out of all the settlements, and they had basically backed away from Gaza. And that allowed Hamas basically to have a base of operations. So during that time, I don't think there was much hope that Hamas was going to win or was going to be successful, but I think Israel had decided enough is enough. We're getting out of here, and we're just going to kind of make sure it doesn't affect us. And essentially, I mean, over time, I mean, the Hamas did. I mean, they would launch missiles occasionally. They would try to kidnap people. They would have incursions of little ones, but nothing of the sort of what happened on October 8th or October 7th. And there's a lot of questions out there. People ask me all the time, was it an intelligence failure and whatnot? And I don't think this is the time for us to talk about that because there were definitely failures somewhere in the system. The question is where, and that's for later. Right now,
Right, yeah, because there's still people that are kidnapped over there, like we're in the middle of it. It's not time to look back.
Exactly. And so when it started off, I mean, again, it caught everyone completely by surprise. I think about 1,400 Israelis were killed in the attacks. Thousands of missiles were launched. The Israelis responded since then. I lost track on how many missile attacks and how many bombing raids they've done to go after Hamas and the infrastructure there. The problem there is Hamas is so dug in, and it's such a part of the society there that it's hard to break apart. You can't say, oh, this is a Hamas base, we'll blow this up. They also have learned over time how these things work. They understand that the Israelis can pick up signals. They understand that the Israelis, can have overhead satellite coverage, and that they have sources on the ground. So, hospitals, churches, whatever it is, they're able to put in their equipment or their people or the leadership in those places. And I think that's been part of the problem here is like, how do you go after the leadership? And Netanyahu has sworn that he's going to destroy Hamas and that this is what they're going to do. Look, this is a seminal moment, probably more so than any other time for the Israelis. They've lost more people than they've ever lost, more since the Holocaust. And there's graphic images of it in very similar poses of people being dragged through the streets and people being taken away. So it really hits to the core of the essence of the country. On the other side, like Hamas had done a phenomenal job. So I get some good questions I get is like, how did we get here? What's driving this and all that? Hamas, of course, is driving a lot of this, but Iran, to me, is the main driver of all of these issues in the region. And you have to go back, not well to '06, even before then. The Iranians have always fought via proxy groups. So they've supported different groups. Hezbollah is one of the most successful ones that they've been supporting and providing weapons, financing, training over the years. In the early 2000s, '04, '05, '06 timeframe, they started to reach out to groups that weren't Shia. So, the division in Islam, you have Shia and Sunni. They don't necessarily get along, and most people will discount any kind of cooperation between the two because they hate each other so much, and there's so much animosity between the two groups. Well, the Iranians started reaching out to groups like Hamas, the Houthis, you know, um, and other kind of Sunni groups to provide them with assistance. And the Hamas needed where it could get, and so it took it. And what the Iranians have been able to do over time is to leverage that and get more and more power and more influence with the group. So to me, as you start to look at how this thing's developed, in '06, Hamas took over. There was a lot of excitement in Gaza that, okay, the Palestinian Authority is out of there. So all these corrupt guys are out. We've got Hamas. Not everybody is a Hamas supporter in Gaza, but hope, right? Hope that somebody new is going to bring something along. They were even worse than the Palestinian Authority, just as corrupt, and the systems worked even worse. And so what you started to see in Gaza were protests springing up over that time period, the ensuing period between now and then, of protests, people being upset about how things are going. It 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 kept developing. Hamas continued to continue to have its support there. And what you could start to see is kind of a tipping point being reached where they had to act, in one form or another. Now, the Israelis have incredible intelligence resources, but they're not limitless. What was happening over the past about 18 months to 2 years, if you look at the news, it was a shift from what was going on in Gaza to what was going on in the West Bank. And the West Bank became much more active. There were lots more attacks against the settlers going on there. And it was a group that not many people had heard of until that time, called Lion's Den. And Lion's Den was a group that was essentially started by the Iranians and funded by them. They weren't affiliate. They were loosely affiliated with Hamas and those groups, but no relationship with the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority security services couldn't really do much about it. And so what they were doing is a lot of the problems we've heard, again, past year, 18 months in the West Bank, were caused by this group, and they were doing all these things. Well, there was so much focus was being paid on what was going on there. I believe, and some of the people I'm talking to believe, that there was just, it wasn't that the Israelis weren't looking at Gaza, but they may not have been looking at it as closely as they were with the West Bank. So when this thing hit, then it caught everybody kind of off guard, because the thought was, those guys are just doing their normal thing down there. They're doing their normal training. They're nothing per se is going to be coming out of it. So that's part of the thinking I'm hearing as to why this thing may have happened the way it did. It doesn't take away the impact of it and kind of the repercussions. So the question becomes is, where is this thing going, and what are the tipping points that we're going to see along the way that will have an impact not only on the region, but I think for your listeners and for retailers, it's going to have an impact on supply chain, and just it's going to resonate in the United States, which it already has. So one of the first tipping points was what was going to be the initial Israeli reaction, which we saw, which was, you know, dramatic. I mean, lots of bombing runs, attacks. They were bombing places. But their focus was trying to get as many of the hostages released as they could. There were, I think, 4 or 5 that were subsequently released. There's still negotiations that are going on right now with the Qataris. The Israelis shut down power, they shut down fuel, they shut down water, they shut down food. They basically locked them down, and then that's where you saw the ensuing humanitarian crisis, where people couldn't get, the hospitals ran out of fuel, so the incubators, water, there wasn't any water. Basically, massive amounts of destruction, because these were Hamas locations, based on what the Israelis had for intelligence. So you're seeing a kind of an and then in that situation, this is almost given the people who had the Palestinians a justification to be able to complain too, which is why we're seeing all these massive protests in the Middle East. We're seeing daily protests here in the United States. There was actually I was talking to a senior law enforcement guy in Boston today, and what he was telling me was there's an Israeli company that's based out of Boston, and they were attacked. I mean, their employees were attacked. The building was attacked. Then the protesters ended up attacking police. It got out of hand, and that's where I think we have to be aware as to how it can impact us here in the United States. I mean, there's another aspect to this, which is the military aspect with Iran, and we can talk about that separately. But closer to home, I think we're going to start seeing, and we already are seeing a lot of protests, but more protests, and the potential for those protests to get violent. And so I'm kind of bouncing all around here, so I apologize. But let's go back to like where things are going in the Middle East. So the big fear there is that the Iranians are going to get involved through the Lebanese. So you've
But
got
they're already involved though, like by funding,
by
like
funding,
funding wise, but you mean
right?
like involved, like people.
Involved, like militarily involved.
Yeah.
So you've got three basic fronts to this war. So you've got the northern front, which is with Lebanon. You've got the eastern front, which is the West Bank, essentially, and then you've got Gaza. So the Gaza one's fully engaged. The hope of, I think, every world leader is that it stays confined to Gaza, right? And that they can keep it there. Because if it starts to get involved more broadly, then we're looking at other countries getting involved, this thing potentially becoming regional or even bigger than that. And all around the edges, you've got the Russians poking at it. You've got the Chinese poking at it because it's an opportunity to kind of poke at the United States. So up in the north, you've got Hezbollah. They've got anywhere from 120,000 to 150,000 surface-to-surface missiles pointed at Israel. If they decided to go all in on that, you'd have a significant problem. I mean, not that they're going to destroy Israel. But it would definitely hurt the Israelis. It would hurt the towns. It would make it a much broader conflict. And then you'd see the Israelis engaging in destroying basically Lebanon again. So they would go up and destroy infrastructure, and not just military. They wouldn't just keep it along the border. Lebanon, Beirut itself would be hit probably pretty significantly. All the government facilities, anything Hezbollah related would be hit. It would be a pretty dramatic increase. And then that's most likely a tripwire for the Iranians to get more directly involved. On the West Bank, you've already seen an increase in activities in the West Bank. The Israelis have gone in there pretty strongly because they've got intelligence that there's planned operations. So Jenin, which is a town there, has been hit a couple of times. They've gone in and taken out terrorist cells that are planning operations. But that resonates broadly through the Middle East as well. And that causes instability, especially in Jordan. So Jordan, Jordan's nickname is the aircraft carrier for the United States, like the landlocked aircraft carrier. It's an incredibly strong ally of the United States. Wonderful, wonderful country. The king is just an amazing leader. What they've done, but what the challenge they have is they have so many refugees from so many different countries. They have, I'm not even sure how many Palestinian refugees they've had, but they've had them for decades and decades. And then when the war in Iraq happened, they got, again, thousands of Iraqi refugees. And then the war in Syria happened, and they got hundreds of thousands of refugees there. It's just continually a lot of pressure put on that small country to be able to fund it, to be able to function, and to remain stable. And there's a lot of concerns that could be unstable. Essentially, you've
Well, isn't
seen.
that what's happening like on with Egypt too? Because, right? I mean, because their border, they're not opening it, or like what's
Yeah, so the Egyptians, they have the only crossing that goes into Gaza at Rafah down south, and that's where a lot of the humanitarian aid goes in. That's also where a lot of the gray market, black market stuff was going in, because there was a lot of tunnels that connect Gaza and Egypt down through the Sinai there. But President Sisi has said we're not taking any refugees. We can't handle that. Part of it is he's afraid that he's going to get basically flooded with and overrun by refugees. Part of the thinking, I think, from some Arab leaders is that what the Israelis want is they eventually want to empty Gaza out. They want to make it so untenable to live that everyone will leave there and go somewhere else, and then only the only bad ones there will be Hamas, and then they can take care of them. I
Well,
don't.
then if that happens, and I was listening to this other news article on this, like who's gonna if they do all of that, just level it, right? Like who's gonna take it over, like and run it?
No, that's part of the problem. Like, as again, who will take it over? It could be considered an opportunity. I'm not saying any of this is good, but it could be an opportunity to bring in new leadership for the Palestinians that's not corrupt, that they can actually get some
I mean,
traction
what are
with.
the odds of that though?
Exactly. I mean, it's this is why it's such a
Because
hard problem.
I
And
mean, yeah.
and look, and when you start attacking, Hamas or whoever the government is, of course people are going to stand up and support them. When you're attacking if my house gets destroyed, of course I'm going to be siding with the government, even if I don't like them. At least they're mine, and they're trying to support me as opposed to what the Israelis are doing. That's from their perspective. But I think part of the reason Egypt isn't opening up its borders is that seeing what's happened in Jordan and other countries when you have massive numbers of refugees and you don't have the resources to handle it. So if you go back to about 2000, I think 14, 15 timeframe when the war in Syria was happening and it's at its height, there was about 400,000 refugees were fleeing towards Jordan. The Jordanians were like, no mas, man, we don't want them. And President Obama stood up and made commitments to the Jordanians that, look, take them, we'll support you. We understand it's a burden. We'll help you financially to take care of these people. Again, hopefully it won't be forever, but we'll be there for as long as necessary. Well, we were there for a little while, but we weren't there forever. And we backed away from that level of support. And so all of a sudden Jordan's kind of stuck with these people and has to make do with it as it can. For the Egyptian side, this goes back to things we've talked about earlier, Amber, which is, can you trust the United States to support you? Right? Sisi's looking. I mean, okay, U.S. Okay, you want to make commitments. Can I trust that you're going to be there in the long run, or is this one of these things where, yeah, we'll help you for a few years, but look, we got our own problems, and they're already seeing us, kind of ebb and flow on support to Ukraine.
Not so good examples, like from a bunch of examples, right? You just said one with Jordan, which I had no idea about, but then
Yep.
the massively publicized exit from Afghanistan too, right?
Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, again, the Palestinians previously, Iraq. There's a litany of these things, and I think this is where it's giving pause for for countries to open themselves up to this. So the direction this goes, I mean, it's a $64,000 question, honestly, which is, where is this thing going to go? It could be a regional conflagration. It could be hopefully just limited to that area. We'll see. I mean, already what the Iranians have done, and they're pretty clever in doing it, is they've gotten different levers in different parts of that region that they can play at any time they want. So they have the Lebanese up in the north. They've got the Hamas
All
in
this time, but no one's bombing Iran.
no, no, no,
But
and
they're the
because
ones funding all of this stuff, and
right.
no one's bombing them.
And I think initial the inclination was to do that. But if you do that, you then open up a whole nother host of problems that and regional issues that you may not want to deal with. I know there's no easy way to solve this by just bombing the leadership or getting. It's not as easy as just getting rid
Did
of
we
the
give them
Iranian
$6
leadership.
billion though?
Yep,
Should
we
we
gave
do
it to
that?
them. Yeah,
But it's only for
well,
medicine and supplies or something.
apparently it's really apparently there are controls on it, but still that frees up $6 billion to do other things with, right?
Yeah.
So they don't have to use the $6 billion in their budget to buy those things. They can use it now to support some of these groups. I mean, a lot of people are forgetting the Houthis, which are down in Yemen. Those guys are down at the beginning of the Red Sea. 10% of the world's economy flows through there. Their missile capabilities that the Iranians have given them put at risk 40% of the world's oil. They can reach Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, all of these locations if they want to. Now, there's no interest in engaging like the UAE or the Saudi Arabia at this point, but maybe later. So that's where this gets dangerous, is where can this thing go, and how do you try to diffuse it as quickly as you possibly can taking into consideration that the Israelis are, they should be able to respond because they were attacked and they were threatened, and they have to mitigate that threat. So there's a lot of directions this can go. That's why it's really important to kind of watch it and look at the smaller signals as to how things are moving. One of the things I thought was pretty telling. We paid attention to it for a little while. So the U.S. moved in a carrier battle group into the Mediterranean, and so I think it's the Gerald Ford is there.
Yeah.
The Eisenhower's moving towards the Persian Gulf, and then they've got a fleet, a Marine a Marine Expeditionary Unit. It's 2,000 or more fighters that are capable of getting inserted at any given time. I don't see the U.S. being an actual combatant on the ground because the Israelis, first of all, don't need us. I mean, they've got as many, they're very skilled in this kind of stuff too. They've got plenty of resources. If for some chance, we were attacked, if for some chance we find out about like maybe U.S. hostages in a certain location, maybe we'd be deployed. But again, that takes it to another level when our guys are actually on the ground fighting. And so I think there's a reluctance to have that happen. What I could probably see more on a U.S. military response would be something like if if Lebanon does open up with all those missiles and they start bombing Israel and the Israelis just don't have the capacity to address it, then going in to be able to take out military units or equipment along the border potentially, but I don't think we've even gotten to that point yet. So there's a lot of uncertainty moving forward, and it's reverberating through the region. It's reverberating through Europe. I was in London, I think a week or so ago. There was a protest of about 100,000 people there. There's a lot of and a lot of these protests. I mean, I think there's a lot of frustration for Palestinian people, again, not Hamas, but for Palestinian people and the difficulties they've been living under for years, and that's what's kind of on demonstration. The problem is most of these people don't know the difference between Hamas and Palestinians, and so they're kind of conflating the two, and it's getting confused, and they're losing their message because they're supporting a group that's a terrorist organization. There's a lot of groups too. I've seen this in the United States that are, like Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street, had its heyday, years ago. They still have protests. Nobody shows up. But what they've been doing now is they've been relabeling them Palestinian,
They
pro-Palestinian.
need a PR campaign, those
They
people.
do. Well, apparently so, but they had something in New York, I think last week, and I think 2,000 people showed up down at their Wall Street, and it was these Occupy Wall Street people. So I think but that takes us to kind of the domestic side, and what do we need to think about when we start planning over the next year or so? Because we've got the election coming up. Trump's situation's only going to get more partisan, and I mean, they're going after him really hard. If he gets put in jail, he's still going to be running. He's still going to be the leading candidate, and his supporters are going to get that much more kind of ingrained, and maybe not violent, but the rhetoric's going to definitely go up. That on top of these protests, I think you're going to have major problems. Campuses already are exploding, right? They were going after the UPenn. There's been a huge outcry by donors to go after the University of Pennsylvania because they didn't come out condemning the Hamas's attack. They're all trying to ride both sides of the middle here, and they can't. I mean, they've got to take a stand. Columbia, I was supposed to do a panel up in Columbia last Friday, and we ended up doing remotely. Because I think they were concerned. They said for COVID reasons, but they had a massive protest that day, and I think they were just trying to do everything they could to mitigate, what's going on at the campus and
Do
the
you
different
see these
sides.
kind of protests and stuff? And I know like some of the well-known landmarks, right? Like Times Square, Wall Street, all that kind of stuff. Like, do you see it spilling out into like retailers' realm like we saw after George Floyd's death and things like that, where it was just massive chaos all across the world, like, or the country? And you think about what you've described with this whole election and then the Trump factor and Now you've got these wars, and no one's even talking about the Ukraine, right? I mean, Zelensky's probably the
Yeah.
most pissed off about it all because no one's
Yeah.
no one's having him on their talk show anymore. And so
Yeah.
it's like, like, do you see this as coming a perfect storm when you think about retail wise in the next, into the new year?
I mean, I don't know where if it's going to head down to the George Floyd levels. I mean, police, I think, are really attuned to that, and they're trying to do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen, and that they have at least the insights to take the people who are inciting those kinds of. They've learned a lot from the George Floyd protests, right? Especially on the intel collection side. So I don't want to say, hey, get guards because you're going like it's coming, it's coming. But I think you need to be aware that it could happen. And you're starting to see a little bit of this around the edges with protests on Israeli goods or goods that, Israeli companies or companies that support Israel. There was a whole host of them that kind of came out. Pepsi was getting hit in a big way. L'Oreal. I've got probably a list of about 50 different companies that are being identified as being pro-Israeli. And is that I mean, is that going to amount to anything more than just bad publicity at this point, or is it going to actually lead to action? And I think what happened from what I saw in Boston, and that was yesterday and today, it's concerning that these groups. There are some groups out there that are willing to take action. Palestinian Action Committee, I think, was the name of the group that was
So,
supporting this.
so if you think about it though, this is a good point for the LP, AP professionals, right? Because if you have these PR or marketing people saying, oh, we should put out a message about whatever, right? I mean, in support either way. Like this is a good thing to bring up for the listeners, because it's like, whoa, like there's obviously security. This isn't like, here it is. This isn't like when you have some earthquake somewhere or something and they say, we stand with so and so, and then you put the thing on the flag on your Facebook page and LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. This isn't like that, which I think is a fair point for our listeners, in case they've got some 25-year-old marketing girl going, oh, we need to say we stand with such and such, right? Because there's legitimate, in what you're explaining and what you're seeing, legitimate protests, legitimate problems for companies that are doing that.
Yeah, it's not black and white. Ukraine's black and white, right? I mean, that's pretty easy. And you put up the Ukrainian flag, but this one isn't. And it's and how whatever you say can be taken wrong. And if it will be taken wrong, it will be. If it can, it will. To your point. So I think you need to be careful when you start, putting out messages. What I always say to people is like, look, both sides in this are it's people that are suffering, right? There are people that are not Hamas, that are, and you see these pictures, and there's a lot of people that are in Gaza because they don't have any other choices, and they're there, and the government is their government, whatever it is. And you just, your heart goes out to them, and they're being caught up in this, and it's unfortunate because Hamas plays dirty, and they're hiding in their backyards, and they're taking, you send in fuel, they're using it to support the war machine. So yeah, so for retailers, you need to think this through really well. And and have a really good sense about kind of where this is going, what else is happening out there, whether it comes to in your retail space or elsewhere. A lot of this is happening, it's on social media, it's on X, it's on TikTok, and it's not in English. A lot of it's in Arabic, and so being aware of kind of how these things are trending in different places too, and the impact it can have, I think, is important.
So are there any places that you would recommend my listeners go to be like, because it's hard if you're watching CNN or you're watching Fox, or I mean, everybody's got their whacked out slant. So it's like, do you have any specific resources that you're like, they should read this, or what, other than your update? Your update is probably number one. I said it. So
And Talk
you weren't.
LP, the Talk LP. I mean, I love that.
See what we did there? It was like it was unplanned, but you know what I'm saying? Like, obviously your update, and I'll put it in the show notes. If you're not getting John's update, you can get it, go to the show notes, and it'll tell you how to do it, which is a very, very timely, valuable tool to understand in plain English. A fabulous writer. It's very engaging. Like you're like talking about stuff that I don't know anything about, and I'm reading it, and it's like, oh, this makes sense to me, right? So anyway, back to the question. Other than
And
your update,
NPR and NPR. I did that thing on NPR too. So if that gives a fairly good overview about what's going on too, I think it's pretty current. It's still pretty current as to
okay.
what's happening. So if you Google my name in NPR, I did something, I think it was last week on
I
All
didn't.
Things Considered.
When did I miss? How did I miss that? That's my
So
thing. I'm listening to that driving. What the hell?
I think my mother was the only one to listen to it, so it's okay. No, but one of the things I encourage people to do this. State Department, for all of its weaknesses, has a really good organization called OSAC. And if you're not a member of OSAC, join it. It's basically it gives you access to what's going on like around the world and through the resources. They do analytical work. They have resources to their regional security officers through that. It is a really good group. And they have once you get in there, they have a WhatsApp chat in which I think there's about 1,000 people on it right now, and people are sharing insights about what's happening on the ground. So
You can
if
be a
you're
member of that. Is it going to
Mhm.
cost people
Yeah.
money?
No,
Like
it
you
doesn't
could.
cost you. Doesn't
Okay.
cost anything. No, you just go online. I think you apply. You tell them, what critical industry you're in and why you should be a member. And usually they're pretty open to accepting people, especially if you have like I mean, especially if you have a foreign presence. But it's a really good organization for that regard. And then what I've been doing is I've been tracking this thing multiple times a day, and people are providing different insights about what's going on. Did you hear that this happened? Did you hear that that happened? One of the things that's really different about this war than most is the vast amount of disinformation that's out there. Did you hear that that the Houthis launched a missile attacks on this or that, and then somebody chimes in and says, actually that video was from 5 years ago. Or somebody was pointing out like, oh my God, all France is closing all of its schools because of what's going on. There must be something else going on. And then somebody chimed in, it's a national holiday. That's why all the schools are closed. Right. But
This
things
is
that you
like when
don't,
there's a hurricane somewhere and everybody shares that picture of the shark in the street. You
yeah,
know, what
yeah.
the hell? I don't understand the time these people have on their hands. This obviously is more serious. I understand that
But
listeners don't. I mean, I know this is more serious than a shark in the
yeah,
street, but
but
yeah.
it's important to get information and have almost a built-in validating and vetting system. That's what all of us are able to do is we're able to chime in, and then okay, I've got my CEOs are traveling. There's a big number of big conferences happening in. There's a big environmental conference happening in the UAE in early November. Saudi had its big FII investment conference on the 25th of October. People are freaking out. Like multi-billionaires are going to these things. Their CEOs are going. The last thing you
Should
want to
they
have.
be like really like if I've got the chief whatever listening to this, like should these because they're this audience is mostly responsible for executive protection, like should they be sending their people
It
over there
depends.
or
Well,
no?
it
You're
depends
like a
where.
lawyer. What the hell? It
Well,
depends.
no, it depends. I mean, like I'm government too, right? I'm not going to give you an answer. Um, but no, look honestly. Right now, the situation anywhere outside of that, like I wouldn't send people to Israel. I wouldn't go to Lebanon. I
Don't go to
honestly
don't
don't go to
Gaza,
Gaza.
Egypt,
Gaza's
Iran.
West.
Okay, can
Oh
we
no, 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 Iran,
mark off these
Egypt's fine.
people?
Egypt's fine. But like most of
Are
these
you
things that
really going to
people,
be that close? You're going to send your CEO over to somewhere that close to
yeah,
all this going on?
yeah, I would. I mean,
John,
like, what? I don't. Well, my CEO is my wife, so
I know.
maybe
I'm
I
just
would.
saying. I'm
No.
just saying. If you had to take their perspective, I wouldn't. But I don't know anything about this.
Well, first, I think it depends. It depends on why they're going over there and then where they're going. So a lot of the questions revolve around the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Qatar, Bahrain, because that's where most of these business deals are happening. The one-offs that are happening in other places. Like I saw one thing on the chat where there's a bunch of kids are supposed to go to this robot competition, international robot competition in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt. No, like you don't go to that. You don't need to go to that. If you're going to Cairo and you have meetings in Cairo, at this point, I don't see any problems doing that. But again, there's certain countries I think are totally off the limit. Right now, again, the Emirates and all the Gulf states are fine. There's no threat. But again, that's why it's really important to stay on top of what's going on. This thing's changing day to day.
So has
And
the US issued any advisory like don't travel to the certain countries?
well, it's issued a broad one for just in general terms about going out, about travel.
So that's good
But
enough
just
for
be
me.
aware.
I'm staying home. Like that's it.
Well,
Yeah,
no, but
I'm done. Now I'm not
it's
going to Mexico. I'm not going to go to
no,
St.
it's
Thomas. Like, come
that's
on,
right.
man.
I'm not going to Rhode Island right now. I get it. So no, but like the places where it's basically said don't travel. Lebanon, I think, is the only one that I've seen. Israel, as well, as be mindful of your travel to Israel. I think they're not going to go out and just say don't travel to Israel
Yeah, I
for
think
other
that's a
reasons.
safe bet. I don't know. Like you decide, listener, if you're going to side with me or John, that you can send your CEO to Israel right now.
So exactly, I I'm not. You're killing me
I
here.
mean,
Uh,
I'm just saying.
I understand. I look. I get what you're saying, and it
I'm a
depends.
scaredy cat
That's what.
coat. You're like globe trotter. I don't know where the hell you are ever, right? I mean, so but I'm like, nah, I mean, let me look at my travel guide and see what's up. So
I think I think that's why I say it depends on what's going on. Right now, I think some of these places are fine. That could change in a moment. I mean, the whole world essentially
which
changed
that is the
like
reason why they should.
3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Okay. We gotta wrap this up. We'll have you back though. Last question, but you're gonna be on the shot clock. So I'm curious because I think if I was sitting in these people's seat, I would want to know supply chain wise, like what are we dealing with? We're dealing with like it's not like COVID where they had the ships in the harbor for 25 years, right? I mean, but supply chain wise, this is not a short answer, is it?
No, it can be. I mean, I'll make it short. I think you're looking at more instability internationally. The Chinese right now are trying to be, I think, peacemakers to a point. I think that, but they haven't really gotten actively involved in this. What I worry about when it comes to supply chain here is Suez Canal and that whole route, because there's again 10% of the world's trade goes through there. So that will reverberate if the Houthis are able to attack shipping or stop shipping or have an impact on shipping in that area because of the threat from missiles. That's why the U.S. has a presence down in Suez right now in the Red Sea, because they don't want to make sure that any threats can be mitigated. But still, I mean, companies are going to act like, to your point. If there's a threat, if there's an active threat that my ship could get blown up, why would I go down there? Even if the U.S. is there, maybe they miss,
Yeah.
in the interception of the missiles. It will reverberate. I mean, we're already seeing oil prices go higher, so costs are going to increase. So I think we're not seeing as much of an impact yet, but again, it's something to be mindful of, and that you got to watch as to how this thing develops. So
That's a good answer.
I'm short too.
I know. This is crazy. Okay. We're definitely having you back if you can stop your globe trotting just for like, a couple days. I know you're like, I'm in Geneva, but I'll do it. I was like, okay, man, that's awesome. But I appreciate you, John, stepping into the hot seat for TalkLP podcast.
Thank you, Amber.
We'll have it back. And hey, I want to hear from the listeners if they decide to send their CEO over to Israel. That is a follow-up question for that's everybody's homework. But sign up for John's update. It'll be in the show notes. It is incredible information to make sense of everything going on, and you don't have to watch the news, which is always a bonus. So happy Halloween, John.
Thank you, Amber.
Do you
You
see
too.
my
I love it.
yeah, see? It's all Halloween all day.
I
All
got
right,
black.
buddy.
That's
Thanks so much.
all. See you later.
See ya.
Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.